Talking with Words.
Jonathan Maberry, thank you very much for joining us on Talking with Words.
My pleasure.
If you are watching this and do not know, Jonathan Maberry is, I know you have a lot of, you've got so many credentials, I couldn't even fit them all on one page. So, five-time Bram Stoker Award winner, New York Times bestseller. I don't even know how many books you have out. Do you keep track of how many books you have out at this point?
No, but I know that I have written 135 between novels, nonfiction books, graphic novels, short story collections, and editing anthologies. So it's in 130, 140 range.
So just getting started.
Yeah. Actually,
Yeah.
I started late in life too. So.
He's put a dent in the paper market for sure.
Yeah, trees hate me, but they'll regrow.
Yeah, we love you though, so it's good.
I'm glad to hear it.
So let's just talk about your fresh book. How long has Necrotech been out?
Necrotech's been out for about a month now. That's this one here. Been out for about a month. It's still shiny and new for me because it's the first of a brand new series. I'm bizarrely excited about it. It's one of those things that every once in a while you write a book that is so much fun and you're having so much fun, even though weird, dark, nasty stuff is happening to characters that you like, you just feel like this is why you became a writer in the first place. And Necrotech also draws on some of the things that I love reading, science fiction, horror, cosmic horror, and so on, and lots of giant robots.
Well, of course. And speaking of your love of the H.P. Lovecraft, seems like that is at least touched in almost everything I've read of yours.
Well, that started with Extinction Machine. No, I'm sorry, Kill Switch, one of the Joe Ledger books. During the process, the events that Joe goes through, he goes into this machine or is exposed to a machine called the God Machine, which is something that I created that's part of the Lovecraftian world, and it shows up in a lot of different stories, but that was the first one. And Joe's the kind of character I can put into any story, and I don't care whether it has terrorists with a bomb or genetically engineered vampires. He's going to be the right guy for it. And the funny thing about that is I didn't actually intend to write a Joe Ledger meets Cthulhu story. My editor, Michael Homler from St. Martin's Griffin, usually comes out to Comic-Con and we walk around and chat. And usually that's when we talk about what's the next Ledger book. And as a joke, just purely as a joke, I said Joe Ledger versus Cthulhu, thinking he'd laugh it off and we'd laugh it off that by the end of it. He went, "That's awesome." And that meant I was stuck, writing it. But it was really, fortunate because I love Lovecraftian, cosmic horror stuff. And I like putting Joe in situations that push the boundaries of what people think a series like this is going to have. And I keep playing with all sorts of fun stuff. But from then on, I just start including it. And also, not that long after that, I became the editor of Weird Tales magazine, where a lot of Lovecraft's poetry and fiction was published. And in fact, latest issue of Weird Tales came out the same day as Necrotech.
Oh, awesome.
We did a special issue of it for the Bram Stoker Awards at StokerCon here, which was held here in San Diego this year. So we did a special issue of it, and that came out the same day as Necrotech. And it was fun, because Necrotech is also the first book in a brand new novel imprint called Weird Tales Presents. So it's a partnership between Weird Tales, our publisher, and Blackstone Publishing. And the next book in the series, next book in the imprint rather, will be another cosmic horror science fiction by Kevin Anderson. And then we've got stuff coming up from Keith DeCandido and Dana Fredstein and a bunch of other folks. So it's fun to launch a new imprint. It's certainly a great honor to have my book be the first book, and to have complete license to do whatever I want with Lovecraftian stuff it's just gold.
Yeah, that's all. It always blows up a little bit bigger. I feel like when you throw in, the sleeping god and stuff like that, you can't keep that contained. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And yes, I have Cthulhu things all over my office, and even my coffee cup has a certain nod to it. But yeah, I mean, it's the thing about Lovecraft. A lot of people don't know this. When he was still alive, when he was actively writing, he invited all of his friends to use his characters. So it was like the first real shared world in fiction that I know of. And I mean, there had been fan fiction and so on, but he actually invited. That's why you have Lovecraftian elements in the Conan stories by Robert E. Howard, in the August Derleth stories, and just about everybody's stories who was writing for Weird Tales at the time. And you know, it's funny because not everyone likes Lovecraftian stories as much as they love some of the stuff that other people have done over the years. And there have been thousands of Lovecraftian stories, thousands of cosmic horror stories. So it's kind of fun.
Yeah, the zeitgeist is quite wide for Lovecraftian.
Yep.
Love it.
We even had that show Lovecraft Country a couple of years ago, and it shows up everywhere. I mean, The Mist by Stephen King is Lovecraftian, you know.
Right.
Underwater with Kristen Stewart, it's you know, that's a Cthulhu story, etc. It shows up everywhere.
And they've even got like the Arkham games out now that is exploring the city that's based in his stories, and the Lovecraft Country, like you said, that was where that took place.
Yeah, and I think Mike Mignola did the Doom. Was it Gotham by Gaslight or the Doom that came to Gotham? One of those, but they've done Batman in Cthulhu stories too, and it's, you know, it's one of those characters that's so ubiquitous you can put Lovecraft in anything. I just wrote for an anthology edited by Joe Monson. It's the horror at Pooh Corner. I did a Winnie the Pooh and Eeyore cosmic horror story. That's a charming little story for kids. It just happens to be a lonely little shoggoth that wants to belong somewhere.
That's awesome. I'm gonna have to find one for my daughter.
Yeah, it's not out yet. It's coming out a month or two. The Horror at Pooh Corner, Joe Monson, editor.
Perfect for time for Christmas then, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Lovecraft brings the families together.
Yeah.
And speaking of you've touched on all these different things, and you have V Wars, which has multiple different, it's graphic novels. They have a TV they had the one series, correct? Which I enjoyed it. I love the novel. So of course the series is pretty good as it followed it fairly closely.
Yeah, I mean, well, V War. It's funny. V War started out as a little backstory. If you guys know who Max Brooks is, World War Z.
Yeah.
He had been editing an anthology at IDW Publishing, GI Joe anthology, and he invited me, and we know each other, friends. So you know, to do a GI Joe story. And after that anthology was done, they had planned to have him do another anthology, but he had to move on because of film stuff. So they asked me if I would do an anthology, and I said, sure, but I'd like to do a shared world. Again, I love shared world stuff. And they said, absolutely. So I wrote V Wars. The first, we did 4 volumes of the V Wars book. Each book has like a 40 or 50,000 word short novel in there, broken up, you know, of mine, broken up. And then we have field reports by other writers. And the books dug deep into issues of racism, intolerance, addiction, and so on. The show did an okay job with it. It wasn't as dark. The running joke that our star Ian Somerhalder and I share is that it was about vampires, but didn't have quite enough bite. So he and I are actually working on a pitch for a new, darker version that we intend to pitch somewhere else. And the reason it got canceled on Netflix, I mean, it was #1 in 120 global markets, but it launched at the beginning of COVID. And it's
That's
a plague
what we were
show.
talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, and Netflix was like, oh no, we can't do a plague show at the beginning of COVID. And yet, what became their biggest show, the movie that most people watched on Netflix was Contagion, which is basically the same blueprint as COVID. So they shouldn't have canceled us. But we're working on a new version of it, and we intend to go out shopping with it sometime in the next few months.
Awesome. Yeah.
Yes.
I watched it during COVID, but of course I thought I need more media to consume because I'm not going anywhere. I need books, I need TV shows. So I was the other end of that spectrum. I wanted more.
Yeah, I did a bit of binging too during COVID.
I think I know I gained about 60 pounds during COVID, so I definitely binged across the board.
I'm pretty sure that I redid multiple rooms in my house while audiobooks, listening to the Joe Ledger series quite often.
Cool. Ray Porter is, he spins magic. The guy's amazing. And he did a great job with Necrotech too. Ray, it's funny, Ray is interesting thing about him. I mean, he's an actor I've seen in a million things before I knew him, and not realizing all these different characters were the same guy. I mean, Modern Family, Argo, Jesus Christ, Justified, Sons of Anarchy, I mean, everything. He's been in everything. Monk, this TV show Monk, he was the giant fat guy, like the 5,000-pound guy. That was him.
Okay.
Yeah, been in everything. And since then, Zack Snyder's cut of Justice League, he's Darkseid. He had a small part in Rebel Moon, get eaten by a griffin, so that was kind of fun.
That's the one talking about.
Yeah.
Here. Okay.
Yeah. But it was interesting is I was the first writer to reach out to him as an audiobook reader. And so many writers, for some reason, do not create a relationship with their audiobook reader. And I thought Ray did a great job. And it was my second audiobook, in fact. And my fourth novel, my second audiobook. And I loved the way he handled the characters. And we started talking. We've become like brothers, and we're really tight. And now it's in my book contracts that they have to offer it to Ray first.
I was going to ask about that.
Okay.
Yeah, he is the voice I hear in my head. And two things about that. One, the way he interprets certain characters now informs the way I write dialogue for them. I mean, he gave Mr. Church in the Joe Ledger series a kind of a New England Kennedy accent, which I was not in my head, because when I first created Church, he was basically Alec Baldwin from The Cooler. If you ever saw the movie, he was a real tough, scary villain, big, bulky guy. And that was who the model I had for him. And then I started hearing this Kennedy accent, and it's like, so he has this New England accent, and it just the way in which he spoke the lines, I now write for his narration. At the same time, I also try to mess Ray up a lot. So, like in one book, I did a book called Ghost Walkers, based on the Deadlands role-playing game. And knowing that Ray was going to read it, I decided to mess with him by having a character speak Lakota Sioux, a very difficult language, even if you are a native speaker. And turns out, not only could he work his way through the dialogue, for a play he had done years ago, he had to learn Sioux. So he wound up learning the whole language, because that's who Ray is. He's also one of the people, and I didn't know this until I started putting Cthulhu language in my books, that he is one of the people best known around the world for being able to speak the Cthulhu language accurately.
Really?
So every time I try to screw him up, he thwarts me. So I keep trying to figure out what I'm going to do next to try to mess with him. And I'm about to start a new Joe Ledger book in about 3 months, so I'm going to mess with him a lot. So if I
Awesome.
can.
So knowing that you've got that relationship with Ray Porter, is it just the way Ray reads, or is it intentional that some of the characters from the Joe Ledger series have a lot of very similar qualities as like Necrotech?
Well, there are similar qualities because in Necrotech we have they're Navy, they're sailors, but they're high-end, combat specialists. So Joe Ledger is about high-end combat specialists, and I know a lot of them from different branches of the service, and I've also been a trainer for special forces in the past. I've very complex and long martial arts background. So I did training for SWAT and special forces. So I know those guys. So there are similarities in the way they act and in non-military, off-duty, and on the job. So that's not going to be that dissimilar with different types of spec op groups. And the philosophy of the character Dr. Soren, he would probably have a lot to say to Rudy Sanchez and Mr. Church. They would get along well. They're three people who are very deeply educated, and that education is not there for them to show off, but for them to be able to express themselves deeply and express complex thoughts in a useful way. So, there are some elements that are the same, but at the same time, Necrotech goes in a different direction because it is fiercely multi-genre. So I haven't written a book quite like this yet. Until I did that one. And I just finished the second one, and that actually is going to have a different voice to it. I mean, same reader, it's Ray, but it actually starts 2 years earlier and in Antarctica. So there are definite nods to At the Mountains of Madness by H.P. Lovecraft.
Right.
The novel that inspired At the Mountains of Madness, which was the narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym by Edgar Allan Poe, and that's where that tekeli thing comes from. That was in Poe. Poe came up with that. And then Jules Verne wrote fan fiction for Poe's novel. Yes, he did the first fan fiction. And that was called Antarctic Mystery, which extended it. So you have Poe, Jules Verne, H.P. Lovecraft, and then you have John W. Campbell with Who Goes There, which is the basis for The Thing. And I give nods to all of that in the first part of the second Necrotech book. And then those characters from that part of the story will interact with the characters in Necrotech. But it's a different cast of characters with kind of different motivations. But there's a female character in there that Joe Ledger would consider a sister in arms. Very similar in a lot of ways, not quite as snarky as Joe, but as tough and as with the same damaged personality, but moral compass. Firmly anchored moral compass. Joe may be weird, but he's a good guy.
Joe's caffeinated most of the time too. So
yeah, I wonder why.
Well,
real. By the way, there is a Joe Ledger coffee brand out there. Did you know that?
Yeah, it's from Black Rifle, right?
No. It's from Old City Roasting Company.
Okay, Old City's making that one.
County. They put, the owner of is a big fan of the Joe Ledger books, and at one of my signings, I was joking, saying I wish there was a Joe Ledger coffee roast, and he said, "Well, we can do that." We worked on it for months and came up with Joe Ledger Fresh Cup of Whoop Ass, which was a nice medium to almost dark blend, and then there's Rudy Sanchez Brown Sadness Water Decaf. Actually, it's quite good. It has notes of chocolate, nutmeg, and cinnamon in it, but. And brown sadness water is a phrase I coined early on, and I keep seeing it now as a meme all over the internet, which is funny.
I use it all the time to describe decaf, so I thank you personally.
It is appropriate, yes.
Real quick, talking about Joe and the gang, I think didn't you just finish or got a RTI news story, a short story Against Time? I
actually wrote 2 Joe Ledger short stories in the last 4 days. One is a time travel story, dealing again with the God Machine. It's modern day, but it takes him back. Well, it does have time in it, and he runs into someone who he loved and who is been lost for a long time, and everybody else will know as somebody who died in the series, and they share a mission together across time, and it was a bittersweet story, a lot of fun to write. And I just finished one this morning. Was it this morning? Yeah, finished it this morning. Which is a Joe Ledger conspiracy theory thing. There's a friend of mine, William Joseph Roberts, everybody calls Hillbilly. That's his nickname. He edits, he's the editor of Three Ravens Press, and he did is doing a bunch of anthologies, and he asked me for one that dealt with conspiracy theories. And so I have Joe. It's a sequel to Extinction Machine, where Joe is running down the whole Men in Black thing. The title of the story is Men Almost Always in Black.
Awesome.
And I just finished this with that. But yeah, Joe Ledger. It's my second Joe Ledger time travel story. The first being Atoll.
Okay. And then is that one going to be a graphic novel? I think
No, the graphic novel is something. It's a completely different project.
Okay.
We just did it. It's Crystal Lake Publishing. And it's the Joe Ledger and Violin. It's called horror graphic novel. The title of it is Hearts and Minds, and it pits Joe Ledger and Violin up against the Red Knights in a story that appears to be organ harvesting, but is actually not. It's something else.
All right.
And that one's fully funded, correct?
Fully funded. In fact, I have to turn in the outline for the whole 64-page graphic novel by Friday. So I'll be doing that. I already know what the story is going to be, but I just need to lay it out so that we can see it unfolds over 64. But it's definitely going to be a PG-13 comic, maybe a little harder.
Yeah, I saw some of the art. Was it Dave Acosta working on that one? Okay, yeah. That's going to be gritty.
Good. Crushing with that. So
and you're going through all this, and I knew you were busy, but I don't think I understood how effective you are as far as
That's
getting
awesome.
stuff done. In your Joe Ledger books, I know especially you have a lot of research, and you have people that when you need this gun or this scientific breakdown, uh, how often do you stumble into that stuff and you just have to say, hey, what happens if this?
Oh, I annoy my experts all the time with stuff. In fact, probably the guy who hears from me the most is Dr. Ronald Coleman, who is now an ongoing character in the Joe Ledger novels. In the last 3 novels, he works for Doc Holliday, part of RTI, and he's a real guy. He's a real molecular biologist and lives here in California. And one of those child prodigy types, graduated high school when he was like 12 or something like that. Brilliant, but also a pop culture nerd. He even does uh, just a fanfic comic called something the Drunk Jedi. I forget what the main character's name, but it's hilarious. Anyway, so I'll text him, saying something like, I need an infectious, weaponized aerosol version of a psilocybin based, bioweapon. He's like, oh, I got you. And he gives me the whole thing. And we put like 1% of that in the book because you don't want to write a primer on how to create a bioweapon, but he can. I mean, I've never had him come back to me and say, "Oh, science will never support that." The most he'll say is, "We don't have that tech yet, but predictively we will. So we can do a zombie apocalypse. We can do this. We can do that in 5 years, 20 years, whatever." And it's like, so he's a mad scientist. I've got a bunch of military guys. Unfortunately, one of my biggest uh, information sources for military stuff was Weston Oakes, who was a staff sergeant in military intelligence, did a lot of stuff overseas. And he and I wrote a novel together. He's a novelist himself, and he passed last year, just after our first novel together came out. But he was the guy who would give me a lot about not only weapons, but military intelligence, because that's what he did. But I also, I know Eric Haney, co-founder of Delta Force, and a bunch of other guys. And I have a ridiculous number of Spec Ops guys who are fans of the Joe Ledger books. And a lot of times they'll show up at signings and offer their services for any information I need. It makes it fun. Because half the time they'll tell me stories and then they'll think about it. It's like, yeah, you probably shouldn't put that one in the book. Or they'll have to get back to me about whether I can refer to that because they have to go check with a CEO or something. But a lot of the stuff that shows up in the Ledger books, it's real science, it's real politics, it's real history, and it's real military stuff with just maybe 15% fantasy, the fiction part on top of it. And I've always liked that with the way I write, because one of my mentors and one of my early friends was Richard Matheson, who wrote I Am Legend, the template for like all apocalyptic novels that have come since. He wrote that in 1954. And, he was the first science fiction / horror novelist to give us the science. Like in Frankenstein and Jekyll and Hyde and a bunch of other books, they allude to the science, but don't give it to you. He actually gave us the science for this vampire plague that's the basis for I Am Legend. And so I kind of ran with that. So, and there's also a con man saying that I like using is to describe how I use real information is the con man saying is use 9 truths to sell 1 lie. Well, I use 90% real science to sell the 10% of fiction. So the reader doesn't necessarily know where I've stepped off into fantasy land.
Right. Yeah, it's just fun because you'll start getting into it. You're like, oh yeah, I remember this strain of code or whatever from 6 books ago, and they were working on something, and now it's evolved into this. And
Yep.
the continuity of it is, if you're a super nerd like we consider ourselves, it's fun to see it evolve over time. Especially like we're huge Joe Ledger fans, and just that world and with the technology and everything else as they go through it, it's satisfying. I'll just shorten it down to that.
Yeah.
As a reader, very satisfying.
And the
I'm
realism,
delighted.
yeah, the realism too is even the way you pace your action. You will take that pause and you'll say, all right, that's when Joe ejects that magazine and pops the new one in. But based on the amount of action that we've had thus far in the last few pages, we're following along. It's a realistic approach to like, oh wow, they are reloading. It's not some farcical thing where they just have unlimited ammo,
Yeah.
stuff like that.
Yeah,
Well,
which bothers me. I'm such a snob when it comes to watching action scenes in movies and so on, seeing the 52 shot revolver and things like that. And also the same with injuries. I mean, when Joe gets hurt, he's hurt. It limits what he can do, and that's real life. I was the bodyguard for years, and when we would get hurt on the job, whether it's a knife wound or something, that did limit the way we fought. And there were some times we got hurt, and I got chopped in the shoulder once with a meat cleaver, and I did not fight. I went down and did a really good job of trying to bleed out. In the movies, the guy would get that and he would clamp a hand over it and he'd still fight. It's like, no, no, no.
Yeah.
Well, some stuff you can deal with. I got stabbed in the stomach with a ice pick once. Hit nothing of value, hurt like a son of a bitch, hit nothing of value. So I was able to resolve, and the fights of that kind last a minute. I mean, last a second or two. It's over. I mean, I think the longest fight I've ever had as a bodyguard was 4 seconds. It's over. And then as the adrenaline goes away, the pain sets in, and you're like, I've got an ice pick in my stomach. I think I need to go see a doctor now. So Joe, the injuries Joe has and has had are real. The way he reacts to them, the way other people react to injuries and limitations is real, because I want to make it as real as possible. I want to be able to believe in it myself as I'm writing.
well, and not only Joe, it's the other characters, but one that comes to mind big time when you're talking about stabbing, chopping is Kagan. Kagan the Damned from his books. That's very similar.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit more about what you got going on maybe with him?
Well, I mean, the third book in the Kagan series is a trilogy. Third book comes out in August, The Dragon in Winter. And that series was interesting. Little backstory. Right here, you can see what I'm pointing to, the paperback. That's the first book I ever bought as a kid, Conan the Wanderer, 1968. I was 10 years old.
Yeah.
And that was the very first book I ever bought. So my start was epic fantasy. We called it sword and sorcery back then. That was my start in reading for pleasure as opposed to reading what was assigned in school. I went from there to Edgar Rice Burroughs, Michael Moorcock, all those guys. That was how I got into it. So roll forward to about 3.5 years ago. I was in a restaurant. I used to go to a restaurant to do my morning writing, and as I was leaving, my editor called me and said, "Hey, we just had a meeting here with the publisher, and our imprint wants to do a little more with epic fantasy. Did you ever read any of it?" And so I explained that yes, I have read a lot of it. And he said, "Can you pitch us something?" And I said, "Well, how long do I have to create the pitch?" And he goes, "Well, we really like it in under an hour." Okay, no problem. I teach book pitching, so this is not as big a shock at this point in my career as it might have been, say, 18 years ago, where I would have, freaked out. So I went back in, had another cup of coffee, wrote a pitch real quick. The character of Kagan's kind of been in my head for years, but I didn't know what book he belonged in. I didn't know whether he was going to be a short story character or whatever. And as soon as I sat down to write his story, the title came up, Kagan the Damned, and that blew up the story. And but I like the character because he's the first epic fantasy story that I'm aware of that deals with PTSD. Because everything that he is sworn to protect is destroyed in basically the first page of the book.
Yeah.
And but also wanted to play with his fighting style. Everyone is either an archer or a swordsman in these stories, in fantasy. I'm an indifferent archer. Like, I can hit the target, but probably not in any way that's of use. With swords, my bias, I have 60 years in Japanese martial arts. I'm good with the katana, the Japanese sword. But at Ren fairs and those sorts of things over the years, way back, I used to teach workshops in the Roman gladius, the short sword. I am, even though I'm a tall man, I'm an infighter. I like fighting up close, and I like the shorter weapon. That's why Joe has a very lightweight, short knife, very similar in length to this one. This was actually a Joe Ledger knife made for me by Nightwatch Knife Company. But this weight, the reason I have Joe use this is there's almost no weight to the knife, which means that it doesn't slow down your hand speed. So you can do all your cuts, and if you're a fast fighter, the fight is done quickly. So I wanted a fighter who was going to be fast rather than a brawny barbarian type. And I gave him 2 knives because I thought that would be an interesting choreography for myself. I wanted to give myself a choreographic challenge. And I know a lot about 2-knife fighting and 1-knife, single knife fighting, cloak and dagger, which is also another a real form of fighting from the Renaissance. And I just wanted to play with a different take. So his fighting is realistic, but he takes a few hits in the story, and so do his friends. Yeah. The third book, I think I can't wait until the third book is out. I actually heard from somebody who was able to read a advanced copy of it, and they really loved it. So I'm just jazzed.
We are too.
But, to say that the dragon in the first 2 books is not the only dragon. Last dragon on Earth, not the only dragon. And it's probably my favorite ending I've written.
Awesome. We Adam and I got him into the Joe Ledger series. Probably I started reading like the 3rd book in, maybe. I got in early. My brother gave me the first book as a gift. He saw it, was like, this looks right up your alley. And we had a back and forth every time we'd finish one. Whoever finished first would text or call me like, are you done? I want to fucking talk about this. What did you think? And he ended that second Kagan book, and he's like, you ready for fucking Terminator and zombies and crazy shit going on? Because we're getting there. And it's like, hold on, give me like 2 hours. Yeah. And that was super fun. That's the way it escalated in that book. So I'm very excited to get up my hands on the 3rd one.
Yeah, it's pre-ordered right now. So
nice. Yeah, that ending of the second book, the big battle on the pyramid, that was something I tried to figure a way to put it in the first book, but there's too much setup for it, and because I couldn't wait to write that, and also the battle underneath with the Shoggoth. Shoggoth is my favorite Lovecraftian creature. He shows those things show up in a lot of my stories.
When that they make an adaptation of this, I'm not going to say if, it's when, because that is so cool. Like if we get that season finale, and if it is that scene, it's gonna be amazing. Like I hope it's as good as my imagination. So
I'm hoping too. Speaking of which, and I can't name names, but the Joe Ledger series just got optioned for television. Now it's the 4th time it's been optioned, so there's a little bit of a history on that.
Right.
The first thing was optioned by Michael DeLuca, a huge producer, on behalf of Sony, who took it to ABC, and we had at one point Jeremy Renner lined up to be Joe. This is before he was Hawkeye, and Kate Beckinsale lined up to be Grace Cortland. And to give you an idea how long ago this was, Kevin Spacey was on board to play Mr. Church.
Oh, okay.
Dodged the bullet there. The president of ABC had to decide between that or the remake of Charlie's Angels with Minka Kelly.
So they are kicking themselves for the last little while.
Yeah. Renner and I cry about it a little bit every now and then. And then it was optioned twice by 2 other groups who were trying to do movies, and I don't think Joe Ledger's movie stuff. I think Joe Ledger's TV stuff, and I want the character development. So the guy who just optioned it is a huge Hollywood guy. I wish I could tell you his name. Maybe after we're done recording, I'll tell you off record.
Yeah, off mic, that'd be great.
But let's just say he knows how to handle action.
Awesome.
But he's also been reading the Joe Ledger books since the beginning. He's so conversant with them. He's telling me lines and from this book and that book, and I'm thinking, I have to look this shit up. Is that it? Did I write that? He's so deeply into it, and he had exactly the right idea for what would make a Joe Ledger show. Not necessarily doing 1 book per season, because I kind of don't like direct adaptation myself from anything. What we're going to do is we're going to use the setup of it, and then basically build the show based on whatever's going on in the headlines now, so it stays current. Yeah. And so if the war in Ukraine keeps lasting, you might see Joe over there, et cetera, et cetera. And
love that approach.
Yeah, that's
cool. I love that. Yeah,
it allows us to play with different characters and different seasons and so on. So, fingers crossed that it goes from option to production. But he's pretty enthused about it, and as soon as all the paperwork is finished, which we're just about to finish the last little bits of it, I'll be going up, spending some time up in LA with him, and to start mapping out what information we want to then share with the potential showrunner showrunner being a head writer for a show, and gonna have fun with it. But he's that same guy, that same producer is now reading Kagan.
Fantastic.
yeah.
Nice.
Will you be adapting that for the screenplays and everything? How
Now,
is that going to work?
The weird thing is, it's very rare for the writer to do the adaptation, because showrunners are as big in Hollywood now as directors and producers are. I mean, these are the guys who they put their stamp on something. So we were going to hire a showrunner, but I'll be an executive producer. I'll have creative input through the whole thing, and hopefully get to write some episodes of the show.
Okay.
So that's kind of the working plan that we have in place now.
So when you're and I'm pretty sure I read this, that you still are the president of the International Association of Media Tie-ins.
Mhm.
Is that you're still accurate on that?
Yeah, yeah.
So you have your hand kind of in both fields a little bit, but you're working with other people's fan fiction, if you want to call it that, bringing it over, right?
Yeah.
That's how it works. So you've already got some hold on that mentally.
Well, I started out with media tie-in, kind of, that's weird. The flu started. I had the flu. When I get sick, when I'm sick in bed, and I get man flu as bad as any other guy does, I at death's door the whole time. So I like laying in bed and watching monster movies. And for some reason, werewolf movies make me happy. So, I was on Facebook I was trying to build a list of werewolf films of stuff maybe I hadn't seen. And the conversation went on and on and on, because everybody has favorites. And, and one of the people who apparently followed the hashtag werewolf movie, and this is, 2010 or 2009, followed the conversation, told her boss about it. Her boss is the vice president of licensing at Universal Pictures. So the vice president calls me up, and, again, I'm still sick. And she said, have you ever seen The Wolfman? I'm like, you just told me your assistant was following my werewolf movie conversation. Of course I've seen The Wolfman. She said, well, do you know we're remaking it? And I said, I'd heard something. She said, well, would you be interested in writing the novel? Because unlike Frankenstein and Dracula, there never was a Wolfman novel. There are werewolf novels, but the Wolfman is a specific character created by Kurt Siodmak back in 1941 for the Lon Chaney Jr. movie. So I put her in touch with my agent. They worked out the right numbers. And what I found out is, when you're writing a novelization of a movie, you don't get to see the movie. You get to see the script. That's it. No stills, no rushes, no movie, just the script. And so all I had was the original script by David Self, which was a brilliant script, and then the shooting script for the version that made it to the movies, and they're vastly different.
Yeah.
And the movie version took out a lot of the character development that David Self had put in there, but also just made it a bloody action film rather than a good movie. I'm not a fan of the movie, unfortunately. So they gave me complete license to write whatever I wanted for the novel. So I wrote a Gothic novel. I did research on England at that time, and everything from what they ate to what they dressed, and trains, schedules, and everything. I wrote a Gothic novel, and it came out in 2010. It was my first New York Times bestseller, sold a gazillion copies. And the reviewer for the New York Times said, the movie sucks, don't watch the movie, read the book. Which sold a lot of copies of the book. Didn't necessarily endear me to Universal, though. I didn't say that he said it. But that was my first media tie-in project. And from there, I started getting invitations to write original things as opposed to adaptations. It's the only novelization I've done. I've done a lot of work in different worlds. I've done John Carter of Mars, Wizard of Oz, True Blood, Hellboy, Chud. If you remember that old horror movie, Chud story. Geez, I mean, there's tons and tons of media tie-in stuff. And then more recently, I've been doing media tie-in original stories tied to video games. Diablo 4, World of Warcraft. I just did a Godzilla versus Cthulhu comic book.
Oh, damn.
Yeah, I'm surprised they even paid me for that. I mean, it's like, you kidding me? So I started doing a lot of this, and the Wolfman had won this award called the Scribe Award, which is given out by the International Association of Media Tie-in Writers. And at one of the Scribe Awards some years later, I had won I think it was my second or third, I won. Bunch of us went out, we had some martinis, And next day, everybody's congratulating him for agreeing to be the president of the organization. I'm like, well, what now? Apparently I agreed over, I don't know which martini it was, but there were a lot of witnesses, so now I'm the president. But I love the organization. I love media tie-in fiction. We have an incredible slew of writers who write in it. Joe Ledger is now a media tie-in because there are 2 anthologies where other writers have written Joe Ledger stories,
Right.
including Wayne Brady, the guy who, whose line is in Anyway, just got off Broadway from The Wiz. Big Joe Ledger fan. He wrote a story for. And so Joe's now a license. He's now media tie-in, and people have won awards writing Joe Ledger short stories, which is kind of freaky, but also cool. People have won awards writing V-War short stories too.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's fun.
And with Joe Ledger, and we talked a little bit about it with the other books you have, the other series, you have a lot of, crossover, and some characters will drop in and out, especially you had Ink with Monk
Addison, yeah.
And that Crow mentions Joe, and in was it Dead of Night, where you have a Des, and she appears in, was it Deep Silence maybe, as a Flash.
Wait, which character?
Des from Dead of Night.
Oh, Joe saw her in visions in Kill Switch.
Kill Switch. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, and then and there have been other stories where he's encountered her. The way that whole thing started. The first time I met Steve King, we were at the Edgar Awards, and I sat and talked with him for about 45 minutes before the thing started. It was when my first novel had been up for an award that he won by 2 votes over mine. And if you're going to lose,
no doubt,
lose this,
Good company.
Talented kid. I think he has a future. So during our conversation, he was asking me what I was going to write next, and I said, probably a thriller, but maybe a mystery, maybe this. And I wasn't sure, and he said, that's a good plan. He said, do this: have characters just kind of wander in and out of each other's stories. He says, if it's something that needs to be a standalone, then keep the walls solid, but otherwise let them wander in and out. He said, your dedicated fans will love the cameos, the Easter eggs, and so on, and will know them. And if they're not fans, make sure they're written in such a way that it's not like anachronistic rather, so that people don't understand it. So I started doing that. The first crossover for Joe, actually, come to think of it now, was in Assassin's Code. Jonathan Corbeil Newton, the vampire expert they're talking to, the 4th Joe Ledger book, is a character from my 3rd novel, from the 3rd book in the Pine Deep trilogy.
Yeah.
And Monk, in the novel Ink, Monk is in Pine Deep.
Yeah.
In the next Joe Ledger novel, Burn to Shine, Burn to Shine, the whole book is set in Pine Deep.
Oh,
so you
wow.
have Monk, you have Sam Hunter, my werewolf PI, you have Crow, you have Mike Sweeney, and all of them, and Nicodemus. They're all in Pine Deep, and it's I just finished that. It was the first novel I wrote this year. It'll be out in March of next year. I had a lot of fun with that.
Awesome. Do you love going back to Pine Deep, because you wrote the trilogy, and you've kind of hopped in and out with, of course, Ink.
He's mentioned, Pine Deep's mentioned a couple of other books. There's a character in Dead of Night and Fall of Night who's the brother of one of the bad guy cops from the Pine Deep series. Jim Polk, his brother, is in Dead of Night. So they're all in the same world, and Pine Deep is my Castle Rock, or my Derry. It's based on a real town. It's based on the town of New Hope, Pennsylvania, which is, or used to be, known as the most wanted town in America. Now, I think Savannah, Georgia, or maybe Gettysburg is, but that used to be the most wanted town in America. And I love the concept of a town where it brings out darkness in people, so you could tell any kind of story you want. And so yeah, I've been, there's 5 novels now set in Pine Deep. The original trilogy, there's Ink, and there's Burn to Shine, and there's a whole bunch of short stories, including one. I had a book called Long Past Midnight that came out last year, which is all Pine Deep short stories, and includes one that has Joe Ledger, Sam Hunter, and Crow, called 3 Guys Walk Into a Bar. And That was Joe's second visit to Pine Deep. His first was in a short story called Material Witness, which is weirdly partly autobiographical. The character, the character Joe's trying to save is a writer who had come up with a unstoppable thriller plot, and now terrorists want to get him to get that idea. I have a friend who used to do programs for Homeland Security, where and if you read King of Plagues, you'll recognize Terror Town. He would do these counterterrorism weekends, long weekends, where he'd bring teams in from all over the country and all over the world, and they'd work through protocols, work through scenarios rather, to come up with response protocols. So there's always a response on file. And since he was an old friend of mine from high school, in fact, I would give him some of my Joe Ledger plots and see if something he could use, for this training. And they would run them. And there was one I come up with that after 8 tries, the best case scenario was a 40% kill of the entire US population. Oh. So they leased it from me. And this is your tax dollars at work. They leased it from me for 99 years. And I signed this whole stack, this NDA thing that is scary as hell. But that also paid off my son's college like that. Yeah. So I just wrote a story where a guy like me had they come up with an unstoppable plot.
Yeah.
So
we joked before, I think it was after reading that novel, that they probably have a room dedicated to you at the Pentagon of just ideas and texts and emails of, hey, how do I make this virus that kills everyone?
Well, I've been in a few think tanks, and there are actual think tanks where they bring writers in. In fact, my buddy Brian Keene does one for the CIA, where originally they had him in to create outbreak things, because he did one of the landmark zombie novels from the early 2000s, Dead Rising, and so he and a friend of his would go to Langley and be part of a think tank coming up with these wild ass plots. And usually those wild plots have a seed of reality, like the outbreak of a disease. And we've all come up with outbreak scenarios. And unfortunately, sometimes the outbreak scenario matches something that really happens. Not because they've read the book, but like I did a graphic novel called Pandemica in 2018. I wrote it in 2018. It came out right at the beginning of COVID, but it is COVID. I mean, it's the same basic way that played out, including the political games playing of it. It is dangerous. It's not dangerous. It's really bad. It's not really bad. Had that same politics in there. And people thought that I was writing it about COVID, but I wrote it 2 years before that, or a year and a half before that. So sometimes we just look at what's out there and we think, well, what's the worst that can happen? And often that aligns with what actually does happen.
Yeah.
A little scary.
Did you have that moment when COVID hit? You're like, oh shit, I know this game. Yes,
because they were issuing the comic at the time, like once a month. And after issue 3, they stopped publishing it for the rest of COVID, because first of all, the comic book stores closed. And second, we were getting such pushback because it looked like I was trying to exploit COVID.
Yeah.
And I tried to explain, even though you can explain, even show them that you had the script from 2 years ago, they're not going to see that interview or that blog post or something. So they just think that you're trying to exploit, and that sucks. So.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Okay, we talked about a little bit. I just want to do one more of the Joe Ledger series. I've got another question. I mean, I've got 1,000 questions, but
millions.
One more that I wrote down.
I got plenty of time, so
okay.
We're good.
And I remember this specifically because they had talked about this, what's it called? The Prince of Lies in Kagan. And this man calls me. He's like, have you seen him yet? It's like, who are we talking about? He goes, you'll know. And I like that you included the Flag nickname in there as well as the nod to Stephen King. But
with permission by Stephen King.
That's what I wanted to know. That's cool. That's very cool.
Like I said, Steve's a friend, so.
Yeah, and I love, and like you said, your fans, when they see it, they're like, oh yeah, there's that. Do you know when you're writing something that like, oh, who'd be really fun to throw in right here would be, Nicodemus or a church-like character, or let's just throw Joe in there.
Well, I plot out everything way ahead of time. I had all 3 books plotted out. So I knew I was going to put Nicodemus in book 2, and that he was going to have a different arc in book 3, his arc is not exactly what people will expect. And that's in keeping with the character. I mean, he is an immortal trickster spirit, kind of like Loki or Anansi or, Coyote or one of those. They're not actually bad. They're chaotic. Chaotic is not bad. Sometimes chaos does bad things. Sometimes chaos does good things too. So we explore a little bit of how far down into hell does he want to go to have fun, and when does it stop being fun for someone who's an immortal trickster? So we'll play with that in the 3rd book a little bit.
And we've gone back and forth 100 times, just late night over beers, like, hey, let's talk about Church and Nicodemus again. And we'll just, that train will leave the station and then we'll wake up the next day with hangovers. So it's really fun to have those kind of things.
Well, the next book is The Alchemist in the Joe Ledger series, and that's going to be Mr. Church's origin story.
We've
been
very excited about that for a little while.
Can't wait.
Yeah. I'm
posted something about it.
Too.
I think I got a phone call 10 minutes later.
Yeah, it's one of those things that's an open secret. Part of it is I made a kind of a unofficial deal with my editor that if we got up to the point where 250 people guessed who Mr. Church actually was, that I would tell his origin story. And Ray Porter, not surprisingly, is the first person to guess. I didn't tell him, he actually guessed. But we're up to over 600 people who have now figured out who Church is. So but they don't understand how that guy became Church.
Yeah.
So I want to tell that story. And of course, Church's story and Nicodemus' story are intertwined. And there's a scene in Burn to Shine that is going to get me a lot of mail. Not maybe good, maybe bad, I'm not sure, but a lot of WTF question mark mail I'm going to get. So I'm looking forward to that.
He's making notes.
Yeah. And on top of that, you said people are guessing about it. And I know you've talked about it on some of you're very active on social, which is, you don't see it. You see it more and more, obviously, as it's easier and you have more of an audience. The guessing of the cookie code, I think, is what you've been calling it.
Mm-hmm.
Has anybody gotten that yet?
One person has gotten it, and it's a little bit of a cheat because he's an ex-CIA analyst, and it was the original cookie code, not called the cookie code. The original one was created by a CIA analyst. It's partly an interrogation thing and partly an evaluation thing. And a lot of it depends on when Church eats a cookie, how he eats it, who he gives cookies to, which other kinds of cookies are available at different meetings. There are reasons for all of it. And by the way, there are sometimes Church just eats cookies because he likes cookies, but there are elements to it. But and that person got to know, the deal I made was if somebody figures it out, I will tell him Church's backstory, and I did. And he will actually, that the person figured out will actually appear as a character who I will kill in a terrible, horrible way in the book. And he knows it. I offered him, I said, you can be good guy, bad guy, you can live or die. And he goes, I want to be a good guy and I want to die horribly. I'm like, you're the kind of person. Actually, the villains, there are people in almost all the Joe Ledger books that are real people. The villain from Cave 13 won an auction, a charity auction, to be a character in a Joe Ledger book, and he bid so high, I decided to name the villain after him. He now wears a T-shirt that says, Jason Adelot is the most dangerous man you never heard of. He actually wears that T-shirt. He's an aspiring writer, and but also in Relentless, there's a woman named, a female Korean American named Maya Cleave, who wanted to, she also won an auction, and she wanted to be in Joe Ledger's team and wanted to have a messy death. Like, I can accommodate you.
Not a problem.
Nope.
I like how you're giving them options. It's like, would you like to live? No. Just
yeah, some people do want to live, the first real big inclusion of real people in my stories was in Bad Moon Rising, my 3rd book, because it was set in the town celebrates Halloween as the center of its tourism, and there was a Halloween festival. So because of being on a lot of panels and a lot of conventions because of my first book, I got to know a bunch of folks, and I asked them if I could put them in as the guests in this town for this thing. So, back then I knew James Gunn way before he was hugely famous. He was mostly famous for writing the script for the my favorite zombie movie of all time, the Zack Snyder cut of Dawn of the Dead. He also did Slither, which was a great extraterrestrial zombie movie. Tom Savini is in there. Ken Faree, who played Peter in the original Dawn of the Dead, who actually wrote the foreword to Long Past Midnight, who's a buddy of mine. A couple scream queens, Debbie Rochon and Brink Stevens. Steven Susko, screenwriter for The Grudge. A whole bunch of real world, horror people are in that book as themselves, and I give them action scenes. I give them, real scenes. None of them wanted to die though.
Yeah. Well, I laughed when Tom Savini was in there because we have an ongoing joke. We almost mention him every podcast we do. We watch a lot of horror, and he's been a busy boy as well.
And Tom's also a really good guy. He's a little crazy, but he's openly admits he did a lot of drugs when he was a combat photographer in Vietnam. If I was a combat photographer in Vietnam, I'd probably do a lot of drugs too. But he's a really good guy. He's a very good-hearted guy. He plays stern in public sometimes, but it's all show. He's a teddy bear. He's a great guy. And plus George Romero was a real close friend of mine, and we talked about Tom quite a bit because everyone who's ever worked with Tom has Tom stories. He's just that guy.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And speaking I wrote this down just if it came up, bringing real people into, and I didn't name you, but my second book that I wrote, I had been reading and taking notes from Joe Ledger books because I was trying to work on my action and fine tune it a little bit. So there is a very imposing man with a Hawaiian shirt that is brutally murdering people. And that was my thank you for helping me kind of close in on some of my action that I was missing.
I feel validated now. I feel seen.
So I appreciate it.
Yeah. And I also appreciate the Hawaiian shirt you're wearing. Yeah, good points.
Just for you. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a big fan, as most people have probably realized by now, of Hawaiian shirts. Started wearing them when I was a bodyguard because most of the time they had us dress like Men in Black with black suits and white shirts, black ties. But some performers didn't want the official look, so they wanted us to look like roadies or something. Hawaiian shirts, big and blousy, and you can have a handgun on your belt and get to it real easily. But I also just love the wild colors and patterns and so on. So I always wear them. I have enough of them that my wife thinks I need an intervention. And the company that Joe Ledger is now shopping at for his Hawaiian shirts is Big Shark Company, which is a real company. That's where I get all my shirts now. It's a mother and son company in Eureka, California. Best shirts anywhere.
That's awesome. He has his own tie into Hawaiian shirts.
Awesome. I do love that Joe constantly wears them too.
Yeah, I mean, he was wearing a Hawaiian shirt in the very first scene we meet him. He's on the beach in Maryland, and but yeah, I love Hawaiian shirts. Joe, I'm trying to figure a way to get toys into a Hawaiian shirt while still keeping him in character. Haven't quite gotten there yet because he's not the Hawaiian shirt sort of guy. Or church.
Yeah, church and Hawaiian shirt would be great.
Yeah, I actually I was doing one online event, and I kind of got dared to do a karaoke night at the RTI, where it'll turn out that Church and Rudy are the two best singers in the entire group. Church does opera, and Rudy does a nice baritone, can do a little bit of everything.
I can see Rudy.
Oh yeah.
Joe can hit the note, but everything he sings sounds like Home on the Range. He's not a great singer. He has no phrasing.
That's perfect. Let's see. We've talked about the new stuff.
One question I have for you is there a genre you haven't touched yet? Is there what's the one thing that you're looking forward to or that you haven't had the chance to do yet?
Well, I mean, there are a bunch of things I would like to do that I haven't done yet. Even though I've written a lot of Weird West, I'd like to write a straight Western, historical Western, somewhere with the action of Louis L'Amour, but the historical accuracy of Larry McMurtry, somewhere in that zone. I want to do one of those. And I also want to write a literary novel. I have one called Fruitwood Manor. I want to write about a guy who comes home from the war, doesn't want to be a soldier anymore, wants to be a writer, and he buys an old hotel and creates a writer's colony there. And everybody who comes into the place has a story to tell, and the place may or may not be haunted. I want to write that at some point. Every time I mention it to my agent, she laughs at me. She's like, "Oh, I can sell it for pocket change." And the time it would take you to write it, you could also write something that you would, that, remember, she gets 15% of my income, something that would, make you 15 times more than you would get for a literary novel. It's like, yeah, but I really want to write it. And I'm sorry, I went deaf suddenly. I want to do that. I have been challenged at times. People ask me if I would ever dare write a romance. Like, sure, why not? I've written romances, but they're part of other novels.
Right.
I mean, Mars One has a very strong, heartbreaking romance in the center of it.
I think Dragon Factory has a pretty good little brooding romance in it.
Yeah, it has a good romance in it. So does Extinction Machine, because Joe and Junie, Junie's based on my wife. So she does not have alien DNA as far as I know, but they're very similar characters. My wife was literally in the village in the 60s. She used to babysit Santana's kids. I mean, she's true hippie. So I made her into Junie Flynn. Yeah, it's one of those crazy things where, probably if I do any of those books, it will likely be a Western or a historical novel set during the Napoleonic Wars. Though I have a lot of people who want me to write a story about my great-grandfather and my wife's great-grandfather, because this is a weird little story. I don't know if you guys are into Civil War history or not, but my wife's great-grandfather, and he was from Fort Smith, Arkansas, by the way.
Okay.
My wife's great-grandfather was one of the last surviving one of the last Confederate soldiers to die. I mean, he lived for a very long time, and so he made it well into the 20th century. And he told a lot of stories. He was captured at the Battle of Gettysburg. He was a Southern flag bearer, and he was captured at the Battle of Gettysburg, and so on. And used to talk about how he wound up becoming friends with the sergeant who captured him, and they went up corresponding for like the next 40 years. It was, and she looked it up on the Civil War website. All of the stuff he talked about was true. And she asked me if I would want to look up my great-grandfather, and I didn't, because first off, my father was a monster. He was a criminal abuser, plus he was in the KKK. He was a terrible human being. And his father was no good either. And when I asked about my great-grandfather, who I'm named after, my mother named me after my great-grandfather, apparently to piss my father off, because my father said, "Oh, he was a traitor." I'm thinking, well, that's just great. So we looked him up, and it turned out the reason my father thought he was a traitor is because he left the South to fight for the North. At the Battle of Gettysburg, he captured the Southern flag and captured my wife's great-grandfather. And it's in the Civil War records. We found his gravestone, Medal of Honor. He won the Congressional Medal of Honor capturing my wife's great-grandfather.
That's crazy.
That's insane.
Yeah. The book Assassin's Code is dedicated to him, in fact. Because it was while writing that I found out about this. But somebody, a lot of people have asked me if I'd write that novel. The problem is we know that they corresponded, we know they stay friends, but we don't have any details. And it would just be writing fiction with characters named after the two of them. Yeah. If I could find historical documentation, I would write that novel in a heartbeat.
Yeah. Other than you'd have to fill in the blanks otherwise, yeah. Yeah,
it would. I mean, except for the headline stuff of he was a Southern flag bearer. My grandfather captured him, John B. Mayberry. Except for those details and the fact that I have his sword. He got a presentation sword. My father kept it in our junk pile in the cellar. I have it now. And he was a Medal of Honor winner. I don't have any other details. Yeah. All I know is it was buried in Delaware. That's all, that's the last I have, but it would be a fun story to write if I could ever get the details. I would like to know the whole story.
Yeah. Yeah. That's crazy. Yeah. That time gap and that bringing it all together.
My life has actually been weird in that I've had an extraordinary number of encounters with exceptional people, or, have been somewhere connected to them. Like I mentioned earlier, Richard Matheson was one of my mentors. He and Ray Bradbury and Harlan Ellison kind of took me under their wing when I was a kid and mentored me. So did Sprague de Camp, who was one of the co-writers of Conan the Wanderer, which I bought that book. 2 years before I met him, didn't know he lived in the suburbs of Philadelphia. You know, I became friends with George Romero. I knew Stan Lee. You know, so it's weird that, and this is one of the things you don't think about when you become a writer. You don't ever think that the pop culture icons that you kind of like as a nerd boy worship could become colleagues and friends. You know,
Right.
like I thought I'd become friends with Steve King or Neil Gaiman or R.L. Stein, but you know, they're buddies of mine. There's a part of me that's not okay with that. I mean, it's like I'm not like there's a part of me that thinks I'm in a coma somewhere and I'm dreaming this stuff. And if anybody wakes me up, I'm gonna fucking kill them. Because this is there's Stan Lee coming over to I was doing a signing in Texas at this big event. Stan Lee came over with a huge stack of my Captain America graphic novels and had me sign them because he liked that particular storyline. He had me and the artist, the interior artists, and the cover artist, Adi Granov. We all signed it, and he auctioned them off for charity. You know, shit like that. You just don't expect it to happen, and it's
Awesome.
now part of the life. And I'm still a bookworm nerd boy at heart, so there's a part of me that inside is like, you know, doing the Snoopy dance all the time. Though luckily, I have good game face.
That's awesome. You know, as blessed as you feel to be surrounded by all of your peers, you know, we as fans are really blessed to have your words written down. Like, I'm so thankful that you have all these amazing series, all of these opportunities, just to put it all together so we can read them, talk to you. It's fantastic to be able to read your stuff.
Well, I really appreciate that. I'm glad you're enjoying them. The fact that you're enjoying them is the biggest part of that for me. I mean, I really, and also with social media, with podcasting, with public appearances, I actually get to meet folks who, you know, who like my books, which is really good, but also are bookworms themselves. So we can talk pop culture and share ideas of what to read, what to watch, and so on. So, you know, the fact that uh, the fan world includes the writers, most of the writers who write in this stuff, is fun because you know we party out with you know the people who read our stuff, and we read each other's stuff, and we have people that we fanboy over. I got to admit, the first time I met George Romero, I you know I had a hard time keeping a straight face.
Yeah.
Um, First time I met Stan Lee, you know, luckily he did a lot of the talking because I'm pretty sure I would have sounded like a strangled shrimp. You know, just no words were coming to me, certainly nothing eloquent. But it's, you know, then he crashed a pizza party I was having for some of the volunteers at the thing and sat there with us for 4 hours in my hotel room. You know, just eating all the toppings off the pizzas and telling us stories about the comic book world.
That's awesome.
It's crazy, you know.
I met you maybe 10 years ago in Springdale, Arkansas. And I think I said 3 words because I remember coming in with my books and you're like, oh, I recognize those. Yeah.
What was the
I
event?
was just starting to write. Sorry.
What was the event?
It was I think it was just the Springdale Comic Con. They had a little small event. You were doing like 3 panels in a row. And
yeah.
I came in and I think I had just had my first book published and I was just, would you please, you know, I'm literally using your writing to help me write stronger, highlighting action sequences and things like that. And
Awesome.
yeah, I definitely geeked out a little bit that day. And I mean, I still am. I just can compose myself a little bit better.
What books did you have him sign back then? Do you remember?
I had the first Joe Ledger, and I believe I had Dragon Factory as well.
Okay.
No, King of Plagues, because that was like I had read that 3 times in 2 months, I think. The characters in that were easy to grab onto and just kind of ride them home because the way that book fell together was just awesome.
Thank you. King of Plagues was one of my favorites. I'm glad we actually did meet. I hope we meet again. I hope we meet all you guys. If you ever come out to Comic-Con, let me know because I can get you tickets. No problem there. So
yeah, for sure. We're
I'm going to get there, but I can get you 4-day pro badges and be fun to hang out. You know.
Let's go.
Yeah. Yep. We'll book it.
Yep.
We did one last year. Our podcast, we just hit 100 episodes. This is
Congratulations.
As new to us. Thank you. As before, but it's tied on to we make movies and do I'm working on my 5th book right now. So it's awesome to, you know, this technology, we can meet people that have the same ideas or are doing something totally
Yeah.
different that also connects to what, I'm writing or he's writing. It's just awesome to be able to have those connections now.
Yeah, and if you ever have any writing questions, feel free to drop me an email. I mean, writers help each other.
Yeah, and regarding that, I think you and I have corresponded just on socials and the Writers Coffee House and some of the other events. I think Rob and I have sat through, and Ryan, I think we've sat through a couple of the like those seminars that you have online and stuff too. So we've kind of been in the vein with you a while.
Cool, nice. And those workshops, they're all the money goes to charity. So I always appreciate when anybody signs in. I know a lot of people do it because they need the writing information, but I like the fact that they also support charity, either women's shelters, homeless shelters, or lately I've been doing a lot with no-kill animal shelters. I like my dog more than I like most people.
That's fair.
So, yeah, and but yeah, I hope we run into each other and hang out for a while.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, we'll make it happen.
You guys go to Dragon Con?
Sorry,
You guys ever go to Dragon Con in Atlanta?
we haven't yet.
I'll be there. Well, I usually go. I'm not going this year because I've booked that on, but I'll be there next year. And it's 90,000 people and it's run by fans as opposed to corporations. It's a lot of fun. And all of the writers hang out in Weston Bar every night. So
Okay.
you're ass deep in writers, everyone from absolute beginners to, we had who was there one year? It was Michael Connolly was there, guy who writes Bosch. Peter David's usually there with us, Chris Golden, Arl Stein, a bunch of folks. We just hang out, but it's not a situation of like the pros are in one table, everywhere else. It's a whole bunch of writers hanging together, and that's what makes it fun. Everyone there is a writer.
Yeah, that's pretty fantastic. Throwing ideas around, or just what you've loved, or what you just read, or what you're going to read.
It could be anything from sharing pictures of our dogs to ideas to anecdotes about the business, lots of gossip,
Sure.
people being people, and in fact, the podcast I used to have was born at Dragon Con, Three Guys with Beards.
Yep.
It was James Moore, who sadly just passed a few months ago, Christopher Golden and I, and we've been friends since I first went into the fiction business, and we were joking around that we should do a podcast, and I said we should call it Three Guys. I said we originally should call it the Liars Podcast because writers are professional liars, but Jim came up with the idea of Three Guys with Beards, and suddenly it was a thing. And we did about 150 shows, maybe something like that.
Oh yeah.
And we had everybody from Mike Mignola to the cast of Buffy the Vampire Slayer on.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Are you guys going to do any more of those?
No, well, I mean, we stopped when Jim got cancer,
Right.
and also Chris Golden and I, our careers have gotten like exceptionally busy. And you guys know how time consuming getting a podcast set up and all is.
Oh yeah.
So, we bailed on it, but I miss it, and you guys are Three Guys with Beards.
I was going to say, we can homage that, or we'll get you back on before Guys with Beards.
Be fun to to get Chris and I to do one as a tribute to James Moore, because he was such a good guy, and cancer really destroyed him, and he passed 3 months ago, about 3 months ago. That's a hard one to get past. It's like Weston Oaks, he and I did first Sleepers book together, and I'm starting the new one next week, and it's gonna be tough doing it without him. I mean, I can write the book, of course, but we had a great rhythm together.
Right.
Did you guys read that one by any chance? Sleepers War, Alpha Wave?
I haven't had the chance on that one yet.
I think it's sitting over there somewhere, but I have not picked that one up yet.
It is a fun damn book. It's also a long damn book. The second one won't be quite as long. First one's a doorstop. But we did all the world building in the first one. So I'm about to write the second one, but man, I'm gonna miss writing it, miss Wes when I write it, because he was such a great guy. He's a really good writer, incredible human being. And unfortunately he passed.
Yeah.
Lost a lot of our colleagues. David Farland passed, and a few other folks have passed. It's really tough.
I heard I don't remember when it was, last year maybe, that after Peter Straub, I know Stephen King was talking about, the Talisman. They were going to do a third one, and kind of the sentiment. I can do it, but I'm gonna be doing it with that hole.
Yeah, yeah. And Pete was a great guy too. Yeah, one of my favorite writers. His ghost stories are one of my favorite novels.
Yeah.
In fact, when I was teaching myself, I didn't. This is a thing about writing. If you don't mind me, a little bit digression here. I, when I wanted to write my first novel, which I was a nonfiction guy my whole life. I started publishing magazine feature articles in college. Did that for years and years. So when I was in my 40s, when I decided to write my first novel, and since I had never taken a creative writing class, I decided to take the 6 novels that I liked that were in my subgenre, which was small town horror, and read them again as a reader, and then reread them multiple times as a writer, looking for the elements of craft or the writing craft that I had found in books about writing, and then looking for how Stephen King did it in Salem's Lot, Peter Straub did it in Ghost Story, Shirley Jackson in Haunting of Hill House, etc. So I had 6 books, Robert McCammon, and I went up reverse engineering those books back to plot outlines. So some years later, I shared the plot outline for Ghost Story with Pete Straub, and he's like, "Oh my God, it's like 80% of what my outline actually looked like." So it was fun being able to find the carpentry, that he built that book. And since I'm a plotter myself, I wanted to understand how they did it, and it was great going into those books as a writer, because it's a different experience than as a reader, and just dissecting them, not to copy anything, but to learn from 6 different writers how the different elements of craft are used differently, and to see what game they brought to it and what innovation and so on. It was a lot of fun.
And talking about writing, you mentioned already that you outline everything before you write. Do you have the end in your head? You know exactly where it's
Yeah. Not only do I have it in my head, usually when I start a novel, I write the first couple chapters and I jump forward and write the end.
Okay, yeah.
And since I have my outline, I don't need to write sequentially. I can write whatever I want to go. Like the Joe Ledger books, not one of them has been written sequentially. Usually the interludes, I work on some of those, and it might be an interlude from later in the book, early in the book. Some of the other plot lines, some of the other, like the DMS stuff or the RTI stuff, may not be written at the beginning of the book where it appears. It may actually show up later on. So, but yeah, I know the ending. And my plot outline, though, is really bare bones. Like each chapter is a single sentence describing what's in the chapter. I don't want to overplot on one day, because you can't expect to have all your best ideas on one day.
Right.
So I want to allow for the organic growth while writing, but I still need the equation of cause and effect. This plus this event leads to this inevitable ending. And if I know that equation, I can then build in foreshadowing and metaphor and motif and other things that allow the story to, the reading experience to be richer, because the readers can kind of see what's going on and kind of follow it, and maybe sometimes get there around the time I do. And then, of course, you got to throw that little twist at the end so that you give them something to reward them for having been such a devoted and alert reader. But yeah, I know I even plot out my short stories, and I write the end of them first too. I've done the story I did yesterday was my 163rd short story, I think. 163rd, yeah. And around story 20, I was on a panel with Dean Koontz, and he was talking about how when he writes something, he does what he calls the Faulkner method of plotting, writing the beginning, writing the ending, and then backing up and aiming at the ending. And it's like, wow, it sounds good to me. And it doubled my writing speed. I mean, easily doubled it. So now I'm doing a novel every 3 months, where my first novel took me 3.5 years. Because I don't wind up writing stuff that I have to cut later on. Because if I know the ending, I write toward that, and it keeps me kind of on track. And also streamlines the storytelling, even in a big book, because again, you're not writing fluff. You're not writing stuff because you're supposed to write something that day. You're writing stuff that actually will drive the narrative.
Right. And you got to be giving King a run for his money at this point on how fast you're writing. He was, the end all forever, and you're pushing out what, 4 or 5 a year?
3 to 4 novels a year, plus about a dozen short stories, plus editing Weird Tales magazine, plus editing anthologies. So I have a busy year, but it's also my day job too. I mean, this is what I do 9 to 5. So I have the time to do it. The part of the speed is liking the speed. Not everyone does. I have a buddy, Dennis DeFoya, who writes one crime novel every 3 or 4 or maybe even 5 years. That's the speed he likes. And then my friend Kevin J. Anderson, who will probably have written a new novel by the time we finish this podcast, because he's that fast.
Yeah.
There was Rachel Kane, who also has passed, real name Roxanne Wright, she would write a novel in a month. She would just sit down and bang it out. And you look back at the old pulp days, they were cranking out a 70,000 word novel every couple of weeks. I mean, the guy who wrote most of the Doc Savage novels was doing one a month, and he wrote well over 100 of the 175 books. So I like the speed. I like the challenge of the speed. If I didn't like the speed, I wouldn't be writing this many novels.
Yeah.
I started late, so my first novel came out when I was 48. I just finished my 51st on June 30th, and I'll be starting my 52nd on the 15th of this month. And everything is calendared as well.
Yeah. Do you have time set aside every day that I'm going to work on this project?
Well, I write one novel at a time, but I do have to calendar in time to write short stories. Like usually between novels, I'll spend 2 weeks writing short stories, and I can usually write a short story in a day or at the most day and a half. So I can bang out in a bunch of those, hit some early deadlines. But if something comes along in the middle of it, I have to, within that 90 days, because I've promised the book, I have to find time to write that. So between the second Sleepers Ward book, which is what I'm starting on the 15th, and the 15th Joe Ledger book, I've allotted a month to write the script for the Joe Ledger graphic novel, which I have to write another 49 pages to finish that story, and 49 script pages, and if say another project comes along, like there's a publisher down in Australia who may have me be doing a comic book adaptation of a samurai versus zombie story I did once called the Death Poem of Sensei Toro, one of my favorite short stories that I've written. And that would probably be a 4 issue miniseries. I would have to find time to write that as well. So, you don't set yourself this kind of, you don't allow in projects that you don't think you can finish. I couldn't have done this pace in my first couple of years of writing fiction, not a chance of it. I was struggling to do a novel a year and a nonfiction book a year at that time. But now, 51 novels in, I should be able to write pretty fast. And since I write 3,000 words minimum a day, unless I have a really busy day where I've got to go up to LA for a meeting in Hollywood or something. If I'm home writing, I'm going to write 3,000 words. If it's action, it's going to be closer to 4. And if it's near the end of the book, it's going to be closer to 6,000 a day. But I know I can do that, so I can plan in that kind of word count, and also plan in days where I'm likely to do 1,500 because I have to get something else done. So it's like any good business, you have to understand your process and be able to work with it to refine it so you're not wasting your own time, but also to maximize it so that it's a more profitable company. And I like being able to put out a lot of different products because each of those products also satisfies my desire to have that story real.
Right.
I write the books I would read. I write the comics I would read.
So what you're saying is you can write faster than Ray Porter can talk, is what I'm gathering here.
No, actually, because he records a Joe Ledger novel in about 3 weeks.
It's amazing. It's amazing. All of that is so.
He also does something that I think is supernatural. He cold reads. He doesn't pre-read the book.
Oh, really?
Really?
And just starts recording it, which I think is proof that he is not a human being. I don't even know. I know a lot of audiobook readers. I don't know anyone else who cold reads.
That's
when
wild.
they all talk about Ray Porter like he's a freak. It's like, that guy cold reads. Occasionally he'll run into something like if he was doing one of the books where Nicodemus was in it, but we didn't know it was Nicodemus yet. He had to go back and re-record a couple So nowadays I tell him ahead of time when I'm writing a book, I said, you need to know this about this character. So I'll give him a couple of brief notes, but otherwise it's cold read. And he just finished Dragon in Winter. Can't wait to hear that.
Yeah. I was
Yeah,
I was wondering that
chills
same thing because he does Vox's voice early on in a book, but you don't know it's him, Hugo Vox. And if you're paying attention when I'm driving, I listen to audiobooks as opposed to the stack carrying around. And I heard it. I was like, so he has to know that that's Vox right now because it's the Vox voice he used in King of Plagues. So that's awesome.
Yeah, because I wanted, well, I was actually trying to surprise Ray with that, but he caught on pretty quickly. He actually figured out who the character was pretty early. He's, aside from being a really good actor and a really good reader, he's also an extremely smart individual. And as a result, he's fun to work with because he gets the science, he gets the politics, he gets the history, he gets the character complexity and nuance. And he also brings a lot of empathy to his performance.
Yeah.
He is the character when he's performing, and that's a gift. I mean, it's people ask me why I don't read my own stuff because I have a bit of a theater background. It's like because I have Ray Porter reading it, and I'm covered. I'm good, guys.
Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, even when I do signings down in either in Burbank or which is an hour, 2 hour drive from here, or here in San Diego, he'll often come down for the release and he'll do the reading, and then he'll just interview me and we'll just chat back and forth, and it's a whole bunch of fun.
That's awesome.
What a
Awesome.
guy.
There's also one weird thing is he lives in Pasadena, and there's a whole bunch of audiobook readers who live like within a block or two of each other.
Really?
Like Simon Vance, Bronson Pinchot, I think Scott Prick's up there too. They're all like real close to one another, and it wasn't planned or anything. It just kind of happened. So I think it's kind of like the town of Eureka, in the TV series.
Yeah.
That's a genius town. Well, this is the audio readers town.
It's the narrator town.
And I've gotten to work with all those guys in unrelated projects, which is kind of fun.
That's awesome. Yeah, his accents. I'm listening to Necrotech right now, and you're all in it when you're listening to him. It's impressive. And his Nicodemus voice, we were just talking about that right before we got on. I was like, man, I would make that if I was playing a prank on someone, I would just have his audiobook segment hidden somewhere in their house. So it would be Nicodemus talking in the middle of the night.
Yeah, and one of the things I like is he puts a slightly different accent on every version of Nicodemus.
Does he?
You can still tell it's Nicodemus.
Yeah.
It's like his John the Revelator voice and his voice for Assassin's Code aren't the same voice.
Right.
They're close, but you can tell it's not a normal person. There's something about that character, and Ray likes to be able to twist the character a little bit.
It's effective.
It is. It's fun for him too. I know, 'cause he likes, we have such a good relationship that he keeps saying he's going to quit doing audiobooks, except for mine. Because he's like right now he's up in Seattle, maybe somewhere up there, maybe San Francisco, doing a play. And in the play, he and this other actor, between the two of them, do 12 different parts.
Wow.
And it's like audiobooks.
Yeah. I think I first heard him doing audiobooks for the Bobaverse.
Yeah. Oh, those are great. He does, and he likes those books a lot.
His voices, I was just, the different characters that he gets to play of the Bob. Like, man, this guy is going all out. And then I heard the languages and everything else. Like, damn.
Yeah.
He's an impressive guy.
At his request, I have a character in the second Necrotech book who has a Scottish accent.
Is that what he wants to do?
Yes, he definitely put in a request for that. So Dr. Torquil Brolachan is Scottish. It's actually Torquil Brolachan. The first and last name are both Scottish names. And I wonder sometimes if people look up some of the names of my characters, because often I pick names that have an actual meaning. Brolachan has a specific meaning that people will hopefully they will look up and see if that informs them about the character or not.
Okay.
We'll have to do that.
Now I'm just like, okay, who else do I need to go look up? I'm running through my brain right now.
his take on the character of Lost in Necrotech is creepy.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, that's the one we were talking about right before we got on.
Lost is a good guy, but he doesn't sound it. You know,
Oh, yeah.
he's a ghost, the alien ghost, in fact. So he has that ghostly, almost demonic voice. And I wonder if people will think that's Nicodemus. It's not. But
That was the first thing I said when I heard the first time I heard Lost at Necrotech. I was like, is that sounds a lot like Nicodemus? Is there going to be not necessarily a crossover, but there's
well,
It's
there's not
the-
going to be a crossover with Nicodemus because Nicodemus is an Earth character. He's an Earth elemental, so he's bound to Earth. But there will be a crossover with the Joe Ledger series in book 2. I'm not going to say what it is. It's not any of the characters. It's one of the things from the Joe Ledger world.
Okay.
Plus, in the first book, you have Bianca Petrescu using a Snellig dart gun, and that's an invention of mine from I forget which book I first used it in. But it's a fake gun company that people have looked for online to try to buy Snellig dart guns. I'm like,
guilty.
really?
I
Hey, it could
googled
be
it. When
made.
I was
Yeah.
like, I've never heard of that. Is this legit? And it's
Yeah,
like,
I mean, there are people who have looked up the drug that they use. Now we call it Sandman. We used to call it Horsey, the knockout drug. And that, by the way, the latest formula for that is thanks to Dr. Ronald Coleman. He figured out a way that would knock someone out and give them terrible dreams. Like,
Yeah. Instantly. No stop. No wait. They're out.
Yep. You get shot, you go down.
Yeah, I still want a microwave pulse pistol as well, though.
Oh, yeah.
That was the focus of the short story I just finished. Microwave pulse pistols. You know, and people have wondered about that too. People have actually thought that was part of UFO, like actual UFO conspiracy theories. No, I actually do make some stuff up. But so I got my 2 gun companies, Snellig and MPPs.
Nice.
But the Wilson knife that Joe carried was real, but that company no longer makes that knife. So he's now going to have a Night Watch knife, which is the one I was showing you earlier.
Yeah. That's awesome.
That's a real company too.
We're gonna look into them. Night Watch.
Night Watch.
I'm familiar with that one.
I was gonna
Yeah.
say you probably know.
Yeah, it's an incredible quality knife. You know, really beautifully made. And it's funny. I've had a lot of people give me give me weapons from my books. Like either give them to me as presents or bring them for me to sign. Like I signed probably 20 matte sets of daggers since Kagan came out. That's cool, you know.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
And also declined signing a baby whose name was Kagan. They wanted me to sign the baby with a Sharpie. It's like the 9th time I've been asked to sign a baby. I'm like, guys, no, you need help. No.
You're almost in double digits on signing babies requests.
Yeah, I've not. And also the people who will come up to me and like they'll want me to write like just Joe Ledger's name in script so they can get it tattooed on their arm, or they have the DMS patch or something else. And that's a little freaky for me because I mean that's a permanent thing in your whole life. You know, that's a level of fandom that is still a little startling to me.
Yeah, I've got a lot of that level of fandom on my arm. I if something affects me deeply and it like 10 years later it's still tied on there, it goes on the sleeve. And
oh, nice.
I've been waiting for us to find a good Joe emblem or something that fits in there. So eventually.
I'm going to be coming up with a new RTI logo at some point, which will be fun. But I actually think what I want is a Havoc Team logo rather than RTI logo. I want something specific for Joe and his guys because Havoc Team's not going away, and RTI is not going away either. But Havoc Team's not going away. It's a little crazy. And I assume since you have tattoos that mean something to you, you probably relate to some of the elements of ink, the book ink.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
My brother was tattooed all over.
Yeah. I think I sent you an email when you were you sent out a open request for tattoos and stories First one I got was me and both my brothers and my dad. We all got the exact same one in the exact same place. Like that'll work. And then I grew up
Yeah.
and got addicted to them, and now I have them all over the place.
Yeah, my brother started getting them in Nam. I have not gotten a tattoo. I have nothing against them. I think it's a fascinating thing. I'm just not a tattoo person myself, but my brother, after coming out of Nam every year on the anniversary of his last tour, he did 3 tours, he would get another tattoo. So eventually everything but his face was tattooed. And sadly he opted out 2 years ago. His Vietnam experience haunted him badly.
Yeah.
I even wrote a short story about that too. That people said that made them cry, made me cry writing it. So
yeah,
PTSD is a terrible, terrible thing.
And you write about the horrors of war a lot.
Well, I figure I grew up, I was in high school shortly after the end of the Vietnam War. So all through school, I was, that culture was, the Vietnam War was everywhere. It was on TV everywhere. And all the guys in my neighborhood, who were of age were drafted. And my brothers, went to Vietnam with his buddies. All his buddies died there. He did not, but he kept going back because he had this delusion that he would find them again. So I saw the damage that war does to people. My father, even though he was a monster, played a significant role in World War II, and that his depth charge on the Atherton destroyer escort sunk the last sub in the German war right off the coast of New England. So he had that thing. And my great grandfather, now that I know, was the Congressional Medal of Honor winner, and our family goes all the way back to the brother of William Wallace. So our family. I'm the first person in my entire family not to be in the military in 500 years. I'm the first person not to be in the military. And that's because I got out of high school right after Vietnam, and none of us were enlisting right then.
Yeah.
And I have so many friends who are military, and I've seen what military can do for you as a person, how it can uplift and build and so on, and also the damage it can do. And I'm so frustrated with the government. I don't care who's in the White House. The government does not support its vets properly, and it never has. So I write about that too, because you're trained for war and you're not trained for peace. You should be retrained for peace, and they don't. So that plays into a lot of what I write, because it was everywhere around me growing up, and I have a great respect for them. Plus, as I mentioned earlier, I did teaching for Spec Ops, a certain type of hand-to-hand combat, and I spent a lot of hours just talking with those guys about life, the universe, and everything. Just talk and hearing their stories and listening to their stories. It's an amazing thing, to be in the military and to be someone who has, put their life on the line, and then come back to the real world and try to not be soldier, or sailor or Marine or whatever. That's a tough thing, But also there are other people, like there are cops, there are firefighters, there are people, some of the guys I knew from the old bodyguard days. I mean, we were in our own version of war because we were fighting all the time.
Right.
I was a bouncer for 5 years at God help me, a strip club, but it was in a really bad part of town where the guys were a real serious threat to the women who were dancing there and to the female bartenders. So we were fighting, I'm not exaggerating, at least 4 times a week. We were in serious fights, and sometimes every night, sometimes multiple times a night. So I've had a lot of experience with hand-to-hand combat as well. So, and yeah, I put it in the stories, but one of the things I do, I differentiate between soldier and warrior. Soldier as a generic term, not specifically soldier army, because Marines don't use soldiers, Navy doesn't use soldier, but someone who enlists to be a soldier is one type of person. They do their job, they follow their orders, they do their job the best they can. But a warrior is someone who studies the philosophy and psychology of it. They specifically want to be between harm and the innocent. And they study war so they understand how to best defend the people that they're protecting. And that's Joe Ledger. He's a true warrior. He isn't in there for guns and glory. He's not a kill them all like God sort of character. He has no politics, and he's not a gun nut. He is somebody who will use any tool to protect the innocent. And his backstory, with Helen, is my backstory. So, that, a different, slightly different version of it, but it's, that explains to a degree why I, spent 35 years teaching women self-defense and became a bodyguard and so on. So yeah, I mean, I was never military, but I do understand, I think I understand the military mind. And the people who take that calling, and people who take other dangerous jobs callings, like first time I talked to an astronaut who'd been in space, who had walked on the moon. I'm like, the courage it must have taken to do that. Holy crap, So yeah, I've read about those types of people, and it's fun to get inside their head.
Yeah.
So.
And speaking of that, some of your early nonfiction was the jujitsu. Or is it judo, jujitsu?
My first book, it's right up here. My first book is Judo and You, a textbook for Temple University's judo program. I wasn't actually teaching the judo program. My buddy Norma Scherer was, and he was a really great teacher, but not a great writer. So when a textbook company had come to him to do the book, he turfed it over to me, and that was my first published book. I went on to write a whole bunch of books. I did books on jujitsu. I did a book on his sparring around the world and throughout history, which is probably the favorite nonfiction martial arts related book I did. And other textbooks. So I've written a lot about martial arts, and I've written, of the 1,200 feature articles I wrote, I think about 500 or 600 of them were dealt with martial arts or self-defense.
Yeah.
The black belt, inside kung fu, and all this. And I taught martial arts history at Temple University for 14 years. So, I've been involved in that for 60 years now.
So if we go out with you, just stand slightly behind you.
Well, I'm not as limber as I once was, but they say age and treachery will overcome youth and skill. So I'm old and treacherous now.
I like that one.
Awesome. Well, hey, do you have any appearances coming up soon? Any cons we're tackling very soon? What's left on the back half of this year?
Well, the only thing I'm doing this year, other than the book signings, is Comic-Con, San Diego Comic-Con, which is in less than about 3 weeks from now, and I'll be doing a whole bunch of panels and signings and business meetings and parties. In fact, I just got invited to a cocktail party for Blizzard Entertainment, because I had done the World of Warcraft and the Diablo 4 story, and I love Comic-Con, so I'll be there every day, all day long, doing all sorts of stuff. I'll be easy to find there. I'll be the tall guy wearing a Hawaiian shirt, and weirdly, people cosplay me there.
Oh, that's
They'll
awesome.
show up with a fake beard or a beard with white in it and a Hawaiian shirt. It's like, really?
Does that
even
out a little bit?
I even had a woman who was 5 feet tall and 105 pounds cosplay me.
Fantastic.
Fake beard, even a little puff of white chest hair. It was hilarious. But she's a tiny person. I'm 6'4", and it was like, it was just hilarious when she walked into a book signing, and we everybody lost it. There was no way that signing was going to be mature from that point on.
Yeah, that's
fantastic.
And then,
But no, I have no other events this year. I think the next event I am doing will be the Superstars Writing Seminars in Colorado Springs in February, which is it's a writing seminar that is focused entirely on the business part of writing. And it was founded by Jim Butcher, Kevin Anderson, Brandon Sanderson, and a few other guys. I'm on the board now, and I'm a teacher every year. And Ray Porter is going to be one of the teachers next year. And that's going to be a whole bunch of fun.
it sounds like it. So when is Dragon and Winter coming out? Do we have a date on that one yet?
August 20th, I think.
August 20th for Dragon and Winter. That's the third book in the Kagan.
Yeah, it's a trilogy, so it'll wrap that storyline up. The Witch King storyline wraps up with that.
And then our short stories for Joe, do you have release dates for those?
No, because they're 4 anthologies that are being, different anthologies where they're putting the book together. Usually they don't set the release date until the editor has turned in the entire manuscript. So they'll most likely be 2025 things. But I do have some other releases coming out this year. I have 2 short story collections coming out. One called Midnight Lullabies, which collects my horror short stories. and one called Mystic, which collects all the Monk Addison short stories. With both have really great covers. The Mystic cover, I think, is one of my favorites. Lynn Hansen painting. It's Monk seen from behind, no shirt, with those faces screaming all over his body. It's a really cool piece of art. I'm gonna print it and hang it in my office. And then in October, I also have a charity anthology I did called Shadows in Verse, where I invited 90 of my friends in the creative fields to pick a public domain poem that is royalty free, but then write commentary about it. And I wanted them to pick poems that dealt in some way with darkness. I also had 4 mental health professionals write essays about darkness. So that will come out, and 100% of the proceeds from that, and from everyone, no one's taking a penny, 100% of that will fund scholarships to superstars writing seminars. And we have Neil Gaiman, R.L. Stine, Shane Black, the screenwriter, producer, Charisma Carpenter, and Amber Benson from Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Harold Perrineau, who stars in From, one of the best horror shows on TV right now.
Do love that show.
Michael Grey Eyes, just everybody, some of the biggest writers right now, like Brian Keene and Alma Katsu and Christopher Golden and Mike Mignola, they all contributed to this. And it's one of the books I'm most proud of, because poetry means a great deal to me. I read poetry aloud 45 minutes every day before I start writing my novels. So a book of poetry, of dark poetry with this commentary, just is the kind of book I would have gone out of my way to buy. So yeah. I decided that. And so I have those 3 books coming out this year. I have another issue of Weird Tales on a monster issue coming out in October, which has stories of Peter Klein's. Wayne Brady has a piece of flash fiction in it. God, also I have so many people, and I can't remember offhand who else is in it, but a lot of really cool stuff. So I got other things coming out this year, and it's going to be a busy year. And some of the anthologies I have stories in, like the Winnie the Pooh one is coming out. I have one, a Mr. Church story, where Mr. Church is set during World War II, where he meets the grandmother of my Sam Hunter character during the battle there was a key battle in Italy near Rome, and they're in that. And so that anthology is going to be called Combat Monsters. So I have a story in that. I'm in a whole bunch of anthologies, and plus the Joe Ledger graphic novel will probably be out by the end of the year.
Fantastic.
Awesome.
That's fantastic.
So, well, this has been a whole bunch of fun, guys.
We appreciate
we
it.
could sit here and go on for hours, but yeah, we'll let you go.
When I can talk more about the Joe Ledger TV stuff, I'd like to come back and talk about that with you.
That would be phenomenal.
That would be amazing.
I think we had a session here one night. Who would you cast as Ledger? Bunny?
Oh yeah.
We went through the whole mix.
So who would you cast as Ledger?
I think it's changed over the years. I know you had one that you stuck with.
It changes. I know for a while there, Guy Pearce, it was kind of in the brain, and this was years ago. I always kind of go back and forth on who I would.
The Guy Pearce is Sebastian Galt for me.
Oh yeah, that'd be.
We love Galt.
One of the best bad guys I've read in the last decade.
I love that character.
I originally had, if you were familiar with Lost, the guy that played Sawyer would be. I thought he would be a great, as far as look.
Yeah, and actually, he was one of the guys I thought about early on. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. Played the character Sawyer, and he was great. He was in Colony and a couple other things. Yep. Can't remember his name off the top of my head. Great actor. It's funny, when I first created Joe, he was half Thomas Jane and half Ryan Reynolds.
Oh, Thomas Jane would be phenomenal.
It's because of Thomas Jane that Joe Ledger is from Baltimore, because it's for
really?
Tom. And Tom played the Punisher. Punisher was one of the first comics I ever wrote for Marvel. So, and Tom's a really crazy guy, but a great guy.
Yeah.
But right now, like the one I was leaning toward before I had the conversation with this director, producer director, was Gabriel Brasso, who stars in a show called The Night Agent. He's an actual martial arts champion. He's 6 foot tall, blonde haired, and blue eyed. He is Joe Ledger. And weirdly, Dakota Fanning had expressed interest in being Junie Flynn.
Really?
So, but I don't know. They may for the TV show they may go for somebody more well known than Gabriel Grasso, but I think he'd be great. Also, he's starring in a friend's book in the TV show based on a friend's book. So I don't want to steal him. Yes, I do, but I can't say that officially. But and we've been talking about Lawrence Fishburne as Mr. Church, and that may actually happen.
Oh, really? That'd be good. I think I had Clancy Brown as my church in my
Clancy
original.
Brown has always been one of my favorites. I would love if he went up as Church, I'd be like, I'm all in because you can imagine he used to be a tough son of a bitch back in the day, you know. And he still looks like, you know, if you got on his wrong side, he'd have some things to say to you.
Oh yeah, he's got the history to
Yeah.
back it up. Just anger.
Yeah, he does.
Who would you put as Vox?
As Vox?
Yeah.
Ray Porter, for sure.
Oh yeah.
Originally, I had based him on the comedian. Oh God, what else is his name? Something White. Lewis, not Lewis White. What's his first name? He's a big guy. Always drinks
Ron
whiskey.
White?
Ron White.
White.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
That's who that visually. If you
Yeah,
think of Hugo Fix's description, that is Ron White, and he was just starting to get into acting a little bit, but he found out it wasn't his thing, so he didn't do more. But that's who I would have wanted back then. But now Ray Porter for sure. And also, Ray Porter said if there's ever a movie version of Ink, he wants to play Owen Minor because it's his favorite villain he's ever played.
Really?
You know, ever done.
Yeah.
You like that character because that's the creepiest. But Toys is a tough one to cast because you want someone who's contemporary. Originally, I had thought the guy who played the foster brother on Orphan Black would be a good Toys. And I can't remember the actor's name. It's been a lot of years. Did you guys ever watch Orphan Black?
I didn't watch
trying to remember. I don't think I have because they've got
It's a show about clones.
a new one.
They have a new one out.
A spinoff.
Well, there's a new one out now with the gal who played Jessica Walker, Kristen something, is playing is in the new.
Yeah.
Original was Tatiana Maslany, who went on to play She-Hulk. But there was an actual episode. This freaked me out. An episode where they're walking. A bunch of characters are kind of hiding out from the bad guys, and they hide out in the basement of a comic book shop. In the window are V-Wars posters and Rotten Ruin stuff. And as they walk in, the guy behind the counter says, well, "I guess you guys aren't here for the latest issue of Rotten Ruin, are you?" And I had no idea. I still don't know how or why they put my stuff in there. But I was at a convention. I started getting text messages. My Twitter was blowing up. People saying, "Oh my God, V-Wars and Rotten Ruin is in Orphan Black." And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" No, it's not. Yes, it was.
Got a fan on staff.
There you go.
I even this is one of those other little weird things. I was watching. This is going to sound weird, but George Romero got me hooked on Project Runway. That's a real sentence, and it's true.
There's our
One of
plug.
his favorite shows of all time. When he first told me, I thought he was joking, but no, and so he got me hooked on it. My wife and I got hooked on it. And there was an episode of Project Runway where they were doing fashions inspired by superheroes, and they showed a piece of comic book art, and it was from my Captain America Hail Hydra. It was the Falcon, Captain America, and Black Panther all standing there, and that's the piece of art that was the inspiration for this one designer's work. And I'm like, this is surreal. I'm not even stoned, and this is actually happening. And the last thing I'll close with is I didn't know. Did you guys see Black Panther: Wakanda Forever?
I've seen pieces of it. Yeah.
I didn't know how much of that is based on my comics. 40% of it is based on my comics. I had no idea until my son and I were in the audience at the world premiere. I knew they invited me because I was the first one to put Shuri in the armor.
Right.
Reggie Hudlin was writing the last arc, the Shuri storyline. I came in. I was brought in to ghostwrite that storyline because it was setting up my run on it. So he did one arc within that last 6 issues, and it says thanks to Jonathan. Special thanks Jonathan Maberry. I actually wrote the Shuri arc, so I actually put Shuri in the armor. And in my first run, I put her up against Namor. And I also created the Midnight Angels, which is in the show, it's the body armor that they create. But in my comic, they were the Spec Ops group within Dormology, and I created the Dormology Anika. So all of that was in the show, and I had no idea. Even the big fight at the end when she's fighting Namor on this island,
Yeah,
it's right of my comic. I mean, like blow for blow, it's out of my comic. It's
That's awesome.
That's nuts.
Do you just have to take those moments now and just, oh shit, this is real life? This is...
No, I have moments where suddenly it hits me and I'm like, I just sit there and stare for like 5 minutes, like, that actually happened. That was not a dream. That actually happened. Holy shit. How do I ever process that? It's so difficult to do, even with the Wolfman, I had written a novel without seeing the movie, but I turned it in early enough that when they did reshoots, they actually built a scene in the movie that's taken on my novel.
Oh, really?
Did you get the Wolfman?
Yeah, yeah.
The scene at the end where she's on near a cliff and he's towering over her, and she's like, "Lawrence, you know who I am?" Well, that was from my book. It was not in the script at all. They liked it from the book, and they reshot the ending to use that. And that's also surreal. So you guys have this ahead of you as writers. You'll get there. You will.
Fingers crossed. Yeah. Well, thank you. Stick around if you don't mind for another few minutes. We'll go ahead and close this down. We appreciate your time. Our
Oh, I had
fans,
a great time.
if they didn't know you before they started listening to our podcast, they know you now. You were an answer to our trivia. We did our 100th episode party. We had the picture of you with the skull up there. Who is this author we gush over, once a week? So you have influenced us, and we appreciate you, giving us a couple hours of your time and just nerding out a little bit.
You're our friend
Well,
in the industry.
Yeah, and you guys are now buds of mine. So you're the kind of guys I like to hang out with. So this 2 hours went by like that, and I got a feeling if we were hanging out in person, it would be a long, fun night.
100%.
Yeah,
We'll have to make that happen one of these days.
Yes, sir.
We will, for sure.
absolutely.
Cool.
Awesome.
All right. Well, thanks everyone, and thanks for tuning in and watching, and thanks to the three of you guys.
And if you haven't caught it up, this is just a taste of what this man has accomplished. So if you're looking for something new or more of awesomeness, you know where to find us. So thanks for listening, guys.
Are we recording?